Welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. I'm Amanda Poole-Walsh, founder of Astrology Hub and your host for our flagship show. We explore the many ways astrology can support you in your relationships, career, health, and personal growth. Thanks for tuning in.
This podcast episode is brought to you by the Inner Circle, your place to learn astrology in community with the masters and transform your life in the process.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. I am so happy that you're here. And today we are kicking off a very, very exciting new series. This is a series that is going to be released one episode a week, and it's dedicated to the houses. The houses are something in astrology that so many of you have questions about. And so we wanted to really spend some time, some dedicated, focused time on each of the houses, what it means when you have planets in that house, what it means when you don't have planets in that house, how to really understand the houses one by one. And so over the next 12 weeks, we will be introducing each house. And today, I couldn't be more thrilled to be kicking it off with Samuel Reynolds. Sam is an amazing, amazing astrologer, and he's perfect to be introducing the first house, which we will go into here in just a moment. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Sam because his story is really, really interesting. And so at about 12 years old, Sam was a fundamentalist Baptist minister and used religion to avoid astrology's lessons. Later, at 23 years old and an atheist academic, Sam realized he mostly disliked astrology because he didn't know what it all meant. Sam went to an astrologer, and this astrologer's uncanny insights into his life went beyond the pale of guesswork. Sam was convinced that it was all a trick, so he spent 10 years doing charts and studying astrology. And as he decoded more astrology, he learned much more about himself, the world, and the people around him. Sam has studied all types of astrology, from psychological, esoteric, evolutionary, Vedic, Uranian, and Western classical, to master what's most effective, realistic, and accurate for his clients, students, and himself. In the process, he's come to grasp how the practical fuses with the spiritual, how the tedious also holds the transcendent. Sam, I love your story. I love the cynic turned master. And it's just, it's so interesting. I find that there's many astrologers, and you probably run into this, who came into it basically to prove that it's false and that it's all a hoax. Correct. And I'd love for you to just expand on that a little bit more, that process that you went through.
Well, there's at least, two kinds of astrologers. I mean, there's probably much more, but, there's some astrologers who come in like, this is like the greatest thing ever. They love the woo, they love the mystery, they love the energy related to it. And they may even be second, third generation who kind of like, oh, my mother introduced it to me.
Yeah.
Then there's the other type like me, who was like, yeah, I don't know if this makes sense. How does it all work? Who have to kick at it more. And it's interesting, not that one is better than the other, but I think the skeptic and the cynic has to work a little deeper at it, because it's like, well, how do I get a handle on it? Because then you either can believe like, oh, I have a firm handle on what astrology means, and that could be true, but sometimes it just might be some measure of conjecture. Whereas the skeptic doesn't leave as much room for conjecture, or just like, goes along to get along. It's like, well, how do you make this make sense?
What I love about it as well is that you're also perfectly suited to meet other skeptics, because you had the same objections, you had the same hesitancy, and you understand it intimately because you were there. So you are a great person to bridge people into astrology, especially if they have some level of openness.
Yeah, if they have some measure of openness and some measure of industry. One of the things that's disappointing for me, a lot of skeptics are lazy. In fact, I've kind of started that as a hashtag some years back on Twitter, lazy skeptic, because they come up with their own suppositions of what astrology is, but they haven't done any research or any thinking behind what it might actually be.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I'll say to those astrologers who have become astrologers who started off as skeptics like myself, we've done the work. We've read the books related to astrology. We still may have questions and challenges to particular concepts, but many of these skeptics haven't done that. They kind of go like, well, why do you think there are just like 12 kinds of people? That's not even what anyone says, but they haven't even looked at the work or
Oh
done.
my gosh. Sam, I'm laughing because that was me. I mean, my pushback on astrology was, how can everybody born in January be the same? But I wasn't even a skeptic because I didn't even give it the time of day. Like I didn't even give it enough energy to be a skeptic. I just, wrote it off.
Yeah, out of hand dismissal, like, oh, yeah, it can't be real. And I think I was somewhat similar. At least that's how I conceived of myself initially. Like, oh, how does it work, or how could it be that? But like you read and you actually focused into my story very well. You told it better than I did.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think I had to think about the deeper recesses of my aversion to astrology, which was basically because I'm born on this cusp between Scorpio and Sagittarius. I was like, well, which one am I? And that was more my issue than astrology's.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Which one are you?
I'm a Scorpio.
And was that a birth time thing?
Well, no, it was more this horoscope thing, where you look up the horoscope, and sometimes for Scorpio it ends on the 21st and sometimes it ends on the 22nd.
Ah.
Sagittarius, for some people and some writers, it begins on the 23rd for Sagittarius, and then some others will say it's the 22nd. So I was like, which is it? So if I had to choose between the arachnid and the centaur, clearly I'll be a centaur. Who wants to be the arachnid, the bug? So turns out I'm the bug.
I love the bug. I have so many Scorpios in my life, and it's just, I mean, yes, what an amazing sign. So is Sagittarius as well.
Yeah, they are. Both are. I appreciate them.
Exactly. So Sam, I'm so grateful that you will be covering the first house, and also that you're going to be an inner circle astrologer with us next year. Super excited about that. Yes. All right, let's talk about the first house. What is the best way of understanding the first house?
I would say the best way of understanding the first house is to understand the general conception of houses. And a general conception of houses rests with the sun and the movement of the sun coming up from the east or at the east, and then moving through the sky to its descent into the underworld in the west, and then going into that underworld, or where we don't see it, to the other parts of the world, and then ascending back again. So that really gives us some sense of the significance for each of the houses and how they might be. So when you're thinking about the idea, when you think of, sunrise, what do you think of? Life, a new day, new energy surging into the day, clarity, where we have some sense of things kind of surfacing and we can see. Some dimension of that relates to the idea of the ascendant, and then by extension, the first house. So that's kind of how we can see, in terms of the East representing our life and life itself.
Okay.
So what you might even say, coming into physical form.
Coming into physical form. So the first house is coming into physical form.
Yeah.
And what are the qualities of it? What does it tell us about ourselves?
It gives us some window. I mean, I describe the first house generally as, if we could think of the sun as more the genre, if we're talking about like a story, the genre like horror or like comedy or whatever. We could think of the moon as kind of the people who populate the story, the general mood, it relates to our emotions. Then the ascendant, the first house, would be the plot, how things unfold, how we kind of step into manifestation, how the uniqueness of our story comes to life through us and for us. So that can be reflective of our physical form, our actual bodies. It can also be representative of our face itself. It can also be representative of more the story, especially through the planet that rules it, the story that we're trying to tell and unfold in some unique fashion in our life.
You're using the term ascendant and first house interchangeably.
Well, I
Why?
don't mean
Are
it-
they the same thing?
They are not the same thing. Thank you for
Okay.
that. So the first house is kind of demarcated depending on the house system you use by the ascendant or the sign that is on the ascendant. So the ascendant is the actual horoscopos. That's the actual Greek word. And being fancy, I'm saying it is the hour marker. So it is literally the degree and minute in a sign at which someone is born or something is initiated. The first house would be either the cusp from that horoscopos or that ascendant marker, and then subsequently the full house, or is the whole sign. So for instance, if you are an Aries and you were born with your ascendant at 5 degrees and 34 minutes of Aries, that would be your ascendant. But your first house, depending on the house system you use, could be the whole sign, Aries, or it could be starting from 5 degrees and 34 minutes of Aries all the way through to what would be the second house cusp, which could be, depending on where you're born, your latitude, it could be something like, 2 degrees of Taurus, or it could be 25 degrees of Aries, right? It depends on where you are. It can be truncated. So, like I said, house systems, for those who may not be familiar with it, there are different ways in which we can organize the different 12 houses. And these various systems will set up a different way in which we can calculate the cusps of each of these particular houses.
I remember when you brilliant astrologers were speaking in the beginning of my learning, and you would say the word cusp, and I was like, what's a cusp? So can you also explain that?
So cusp is the beginning or the marker for each designated house. So for instance, there are 12 houses. If you have, like I mentioned, 25 degrees and let's say 5 minutes for your second house after you have like a certain degree for your first house, then that would be the second house cusp or the marker for the start of that house, and so on. If you use a growing popular house system called the whole sign house system, then what you would have as the marker for the whole house would be the whole sign. So if you're Aries rising, and that, just to kind of give that designation, that's for the whole sign. Now your actual ascendant, like I said, could be 5 degrees and 34 minutes. And that's an actual degree point. Doesn't always have to be a cusp. If you're using a different house system, it could be that cusp. But going back to whole sign houses, then the second house would start with the whole sign of Taurus. And then so on. Third house would be the whole sign of Gemini, and then so on, all the way around the zodiac, or all the way around the houses.
Okay, and you're using the term ascendant and rising interchangeably. Are those the same exact thing?
No. So the ascendant is literally that, the horoscopos, that marker. You could be a Libra rising. Let's change it up a little bit rather than just starting with the easy Aries rising. You could be a Libra rising, but that doesn't give me the actual degree, which probably brings up a natural question. Well, why does the degree matter? Well, the degree matters because it gives us more, that particular degree can give us more information about all the planets that are connected at that particular degree.
I'm wanting us to set the foundation here a little bit because this is important to understand as we move forward.
Absolutely.
In addition, if any of you, your head started spinning, don't worry about it, because you also will still be able to get the qualities of the first house and understand, each of the houses in this series without completely understanding all the technical details of how certain things are calculated or what every single word means. So that was for those of you who are ready for that. But don't worry if you aren't ready for that, because let's talk about just the first house in general. So if people look at their chart and they're looking at a little triangle on their chart and it says 1, they're like, okay, there's my first house. Oh, and I see that I have, let's use a sign, Aquarius there. What can they tell about their chart and about their life from that first house?
So from that first house, they're getting an understanding that they are on a certain mission related to the themes and ideas related to Aquarius, which are also informed by the planet that's in charge of Aquarius. Now, this is where we get into some nuances, but I'll try to keep it simple. One particular way in which we can look at it, the traditional ruler or planet in charge of Aquarius is Saturn.
Well, so you're saying the sign is indicating the quality of your mission, which is what the first house is about. So
Yes.
that like very core mission or sort of point or purpose for your existence.
Like the plot, yeah, it gives us a unique way in which your story is going to unfold. So many would say, well, isn't that my sun sign? Well, the sun sign gives us the core sensibility of it, but how it kind of plays out is going to be through your unique flavor that comes out through your ascendant. Because
Oh.
you can have someone who's born of the same sign, Capricorn, who's a different Capricorn. So one could be a Capricorn rising, another could be Aquarius rising. So they may have different ways in which they manifest the intention of that sun.
Okay, and what we have rising, I just want to make sure it's clear. What we have rising is going to indicate what our first house is.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Now, is the first house your sort of mask or persona, or is it deeper? I mean, is it sort of a superficial appearance, or is it actually that deeper mission kind of soul purpose kind of thing we were just talking about?
So there's a historical divide that has happened. So with our growth in astrology in the 20th and now into the 21st century, astrology kind of rediscovered a lot of its origins in terms of Hellenistic astrology and even going into medieval astrology. And those forms of astrology had a very different take on what the ascendant, the rising really meant. But in the modern sense, it came to be associated with very psychological terms, your persona, your mask. The classical vision of it was kind of more how I described it. This is your life source. This is more how you unfold the plot, the uniqueness of your life, how you're steering the ship of your life toward the shore that you want. So I'm not going to say that mask or persona is incorrect, just because one, it's modern, and two, like, oh, it's kind of more steeped in a psychological perspective. I think we can have a happy medium. I would say that it's deeper than just your mask, because the mask means like, oh, I can just take it off. I think it is, if we look at it as a plot, it's what you're growing toward, what you're actually moving into. So it is reflective of who you are and some aspect of your identity. So it is a key aspect of identity that unfolds. So it's not just as simple as a mask that you can take off and on, but it may be the thing that people recognize as who you are, especially as you get older and you get more comfortable in your body. You might remember that I said it is your physical form. It's how you kind of grow into yourself. And just like we grow into our bodies, right? I grew into this forehead, right? It was like a big, massive forehead that I had to grow into.
Okay, Sam, let's talk about that a little bit. How does it dictate our appearance? And could you look at someone and make a guess about their first house just based on how they look?
Sure. Yeah. In fact, this comes into the work related to something called rectification, where an astrologer tries to figure out, based on certain events in your life, when you were born, especially when you don't know your birth time. So some measure of that does relate to your physical form, especially when it's pretty close. Like, well, am I a Gemini rising or am I a Cancer rising? So there's a morphological difference between some of the expectations we might have with a Gemini rising as versus a Cancer rising, in terms of accents of the body. Some things have been used classically related to complexion. Of course, now that we're in a more diverse population, we have to be attentive to that. You know, if you're doing the rectification for a very darker skinned person, like, well, you're not as pale as a Cancer is supposed to be. Um, so we may not go in that particular direction, but it may be, well, your eyes are rounder in a certain way. Or, you know, in terms of morphology, there's a, you know, maybe a Cancer as a water sign, there might be a lot more fullness related to the body, you know, depending on, you know, who we're talking about in terms of their ethnicity or background. So it may be that we see that, oh, well, they're slimmer in their particular way. So that's an argument more toward the Gemini rising. They're athletic a certain way, or they're how they might also engage. This is personality. That's another way in which we can talk about persona and the dimension of persona. Their personality comes through a certain way, how they really greet the world. And that's not just dictated by the rising sign. The rising sign gives us a very key clue, but it's going to be the planet in charge of that. And then we could talk about what kinds of things might get affected. I'll give you an interesting example, and there's no clear-cut way in which we can always work with this. So there's a friend of mine, an Australian astrologer named Kira Sutherland, right? Who is also, like, I'm a Pisces rising. She's a Pisces rising. She has Jupiter in Virgo. I have Jupiter in Virgo in the opposite sign. And it was Kelly Surtees, who's also influenced by Pisces, who also pointed this out. I'm very short. Kira is very tall, right? So we both have the influence of Jupiter and kind of going with the extremes, you know, either very short, very tall. So that's another way in which we can figure out things by the ascendant.
Okay. So again, I'm gonna just make sure we're following. I remember when these pieces started to come together for me, and it was like, oh, okay, I get it. So when we're saying rising or ascendant or first house, usually we're talking about the same sign.
Correct.
Right? Yes. Okay. So if you, whatever your rising or ascendant is what is your first house by sign, then every single sign has a planetary ruler. And so you're looking at both things. You're looking at the sign, and then you're looking at the planet that rules the sign. And
Correct.
They're all giving you clues. Yeah, exactly. And so we've actually created a free gift as part of this house series to help you understand the rulers of each of the signs and how that helps you unpack this. It's kind of like a, look here and then look there and then look here. And you can really take it a little bit like a step-by-step process. Yeah. Okay. So, and what we're talking about here is, if you know what your rising sign is, that rising sign is coloring your whole first house. Right. And then that is, like you said, that's telling us this plot line.
Yes.
It is how your plot is going to unfold. It's the uniqueness of your life, how you're steering your life. It can definitely come into your physical form, your face. It's the story that you're trying to tell with your life.
Correct.
Okay. I love this. And what does it mean when you have no planets in the first house, or if you have a lot of planets in the first house?
When you have no planets in the first house, there's no additional detail that's necessarily been added by the cosmos, but you still always have the ruler. So the ruler is still going to be looking after that place it rules. And we can also, if people don't like the idea of ruler, we could say patron. It's kind of still going to be the patron of that particular place. So there's always still some commentary. It doesn't mean if you have an absent house that things related to that house are going to be absent in your life. I don't have a personality because I don't have any planets in the first house. No, of course you have personality, even if you don't have planets or points there. But what if I have a lot of planets there? Well, when you have what we say tenants in the house, that means then they're going to have a contributing say in what happens in that house. So if you have Pluto there, say matched also with Mars, matched with Mercury, they're going to have some measure of influence in how your story unfolds because they're involved in that house. And that's true in general for any particular house, But because it's the first house, the lead house, the house that unfolds your story, it has a lot of impact, a lot of say in terms of how it's going to affect. And that's also going to be true for planets that might even be opposing that house or have other kinds of aspects related to the house. But we're talking, just to keep it simple, more like, well, vacancy versus tenancy. So when we have tenancy, you're going to have people who are your planets who are going to try to vocalize in some clear way. So for instance, if you have Pluto conjoined to your ascendant, which also means it's in your first house, it's going to mean that, Plutonian themes, dealing with the intensity, dealing with also wanting to find the depth of life, maybe even expressing yourself in extremes. And people live through this, who have rented at some particular point in their life or had tenants. We experience this. So right now I'm renting, right? So I'm in a rented place. So I've added my kind of color and way of doing things. So it's the same thing with these planets, even though there is an owner of this property who has, by their own design and ways in which they kind of set things up, kind of condition like there's a wall there instead of like nothing. So now I think, well, let me put a bookshelf there. There's because there's a wall. So there's ways in which the planets also try to configure in relation to the house.
Ooh, that's so helpful. So the planets are the tenants. The owner of the house is the planet that rules the sign.
Correct.
All right. Okay. That's really clear. There's a lot of people wonder about the first house and attractiveness. Is there any correlation between the first house and how attractive you are or attractive someone is?
Yeah, it can be, in terms of, but it's not just by, the planets there. It also can be related to particular signs that come on the rising. So for instance, there are many attractive Libra risings as an example. And it doesn't mean like, okay, what if I have Saturn there? It may be that Saturn in your first house may be suggestive of where you have maybe even a sense of authority. And there's a way in which you come off, because attraction isn't just about physical beauty. It's not just the physicality. It's some ways in which it might be enhanced by your charisma, a certain aspect of charm. For instance, there could be someone who, oh, Marilyn Monroe is a Leo rising. I'm a Leo rising. I must be just as beautiful as she. It doesn't always, or, I'm more beautiful than she is, whatever. But what the general theory is in terms of classically, sometimes it can be that a person who identifies or is assigned feminine at birth might benefit from having a quote unquote masculine sign rising, which is the ascendant for Marilyn Monroe is Leo. It's a fire or air sign that are quote unquote masculine. So it's almost this contrast that kind of even stimulates a certain beauty, a rationality. And you could say, well, maybe for a masculine man, is it possible that they may also have like a feminine sign rising, which is like water or earth? Yes. So that's one contributing factor, but it's not always that you're going to have, for instance, a particular planet rising. Someone else who is deemed beautiful, and I know I'm just picking women because I guess I'm just being partial. Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie is also seen as a beautiful person, and also Gemini. She is an interesting contrast because she is late degree of Cancer rising. So it's a feminine sign, but she has a very strong moon and a masculine sign, right? Or an assertive sign. So some dimension of this is not just determined singularly by the ascendant, but the planets that are in dialogue, we can say, with the ascendant.
How interesting. You're talking a little bit about like the polarity is what's creating that attractiveness. I like also what you brought up about attractiveness not always being the quote unquote stereotypical beauty, because sometimes there's people that are just magnetic and attractive and they're not, textbook beautiful or handsome or any of those things. There's just something about them that draws people to them. They are attractive.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a little more nuanced than just like, oh, I have this rising, so that means I'm attractive.
Yeah, or to say, because I'm Libra rising, I'm going to be beautiful, or to say because, oh, you have Capricorn rising that's ruled by Saturn, you're not. None of that is exclusively true. It's going to be dependent on some other dialogue or other planets who are tenanting that house.
Okay. Well, and it seems to me like other factors in terms of even how you present yourself, because some people maybe just pure physically aren't as attractive, but they actually know how to enhance their features and they know how to
That's absolutely true.
There's a lot of different things at play in. Okay. Is the first house better at dictating your personality than the sun? Or is the sun more your personality? And again, like we've been talking about, the first house is more the plot.
I would say that the sun gives the overall, like DNA, like the code. It's the source code. Because the sun, as I said, how to understand the houses is by understanding the movement of the sun going from the east to the west. So it gives us the source code of what we are, but how that unfolds, which is the dictates of often that influences personality, is more the rising sign / first house. And why that becomes important as a distinction is that your personality is in evolution, and although you may have certain components of it, the seed of it, that's the continuity through the ages. And I think we grow more into our ascendants, and our ascendants reflect that aspects of growth. For instance, I'm a Pisces rising, as I mentioned. I wouldn't describe myself related to the signatures and themes of Pisces earlier in my life as versus what I am now. I think I was more that, Scorpio, passionate, kind of more doing things, in that scorpionic, intense fashion. It's kind of the softening aspects of Pisces, the counseling aspects of Pisces, the spiritual component of Pisces has always been there, but it's kind of like been moving, over time. So I think that becomes reflective of how the personality kind of shines through. We can think about this dialogue of personality as the sun going through the church glass window and the ascendant or the rising sign as that church glass window, kind of giving more the color, the shape of it.
I love that. I love your analogies. Really helpful. Yeah. And I've actually had the same experience. So I'm a Capricorn with Aquarius rising. I wouldn't call the beginning part of my life very Aquarian at all. But later in life, I'm developing more of the Aquarius aspects of myself, but I'm still doing it in the Capricorn way, like you said.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Fascinating. All right. So we have our birth chart that's still, right, the screenshot of the sky at the time of our birth. And then we have the planets keep moving, right? So we go through our life and the planets are continuing to move. What does it mean when we have planets actually moving through our first house by transit?
It affects the body and identity, and the sense of self, and that can go along a certain level of scale. So for instance, just to give you the permutations or some of the permutations that can happen. Let's say Uranus going over your first house or into your first house through your ascendant, whatever house system you use, but going into your first house. It can signify something relatively innocuous as your first tattoo, right? Where you kind of make some unique out of the blue change related to your physical form, which, unless it's going to be like a tattoo that is like snakes all the way up from your foot to your face, no one may even have to see it. But that's relatively one particular way. Speaking of Uranus, I'll tell you a funny story as a manifestation. I was playing around and rectifying my chart, and I had settled on a time within roughly a minute of my birth time, my recorded birth time. And I was trying to figure out, well, let's see if it's this. And Uranus actually was in Pisces, about to go over my ascendant. At the time, I was big into dodgeball and playing dodgeball. And on the day that it was first going over this new ascendant I had assigned myself based on rectifying my chart, I was like, well, I should have some kind of Uranian surprising, unusual event. Well, while playing dodgeball, I did have a couple of events. I caught the ball between my legs, so I felt like a champion, like, right? And I also caught it, by my chest. I also caught it with my face
Oh
that
no.
day, right? And I, at first I was like, oh, I can keep on playing until I felt the heat of, the I guess the hit on my face, and then I felt some of it start to swell. So I was like, no, I'm gonna go to the locker and go home. So I went to my locker room, but while I was in there, I had something that only astrologers can get really excited about. I was like, wait, I think I have the right ascendant. I got Uranus in the face. I got
Oh,
a
it's so great.
surprise.
Yes.
So that can be one manifestation of it, as something as spot on or almost too spot on for that. It could be a change related to your name. It could become like, now I am Doctor blah blah blah, or it could be like another sense of a title, or even some loss of a title, or something that you feel, let's say it's Saturn, you feel the weight of on it. So as Saturn was approaching my ascendant once, it doesn't mean it's true every time. I had to deal with a significant death.
Mm.
So it was the heaviness of Saturn and feeling the weight, but it also helped me mature. It was a maturation. So Saturn deals with the themes related to maturity. So it's kind of like, oh, well, I have to take care of myself rather than someone I have relied on helping to take care of me.
So when we have a planet transiting the first house, we take the quality of that planet. So if it's Pluto, it might be more transformation, kind of that cathartic, deep change. When it's Saturn, it could be some sort of loss or constriction or limitation.
Or responsibility.
Or
right?
responsibility, right? Yeah. And that we apply it to either our physical body, or our appearance, or the main plot of our life, the main storyline, and maybe our identity.
Yeah, so it could be like, for instance, if Venus, as she does every year, transits over your ascendant, it might be where you change some measure of your fashion sense rather than before the season. It's kind of more so where you have a different appreciation, or others just find you even more attractive. You get more compliments during that time frame. Might be a good time in which you get on the dating app again and put out a picture and people seem to be drawn toward you, or to be more social, that you do go to that concert, let's say, again, with Venus going over your ascendant.
Can planets in the first house indicate fame? Is there any connection between the first house and fame?
I think that's a weaker indication. Just to rely on planets in the first house. There are different ways by which we can figure out eminence related to a chart, which isn't singularly determined by the first house. Some of it can be related to the 10th house, which is more your public life, more how others see you. Some of it can be related to some other things that I don't know we're going to talk about in the series, like your part of fortune, your lot of fortune. So kind of just relying on planets in your first house may not be an indication of fame. Like I mentioned Marilyn Monroe, and we're pretty certain of her birth time. She didn't have any planets in Leo in the first house. I looked up George Clooney, who is seen as one of the world's handsomest men, Pisces rising. He doesn't have anything in the first house. So you have to look more for the ruler, other points of significance, rather than just relying on planets in the first house for eminence or fame.
And we will be getting into, as we continue this house series, we'll be looking at different houses and which houses might actually have more clues into things like fame. Also, you mentioned the part of fortune, which Donna Woodwell, actually, she's going to be an inner circle astrologer for us in 2023. And she is going to be doing her mastery class on
Ooh.
the part of fortune, which I'm really excited about because it's like this mysterious placement. At least for me, I just don't feel like there's a whole lot of information
Oh, it's
about
powerful. I can't
it's
wait. When you learn more about it, I mean, I also talk about a lot of fortune. It's a very powerful significance. I mean, speaking of ascendants, our forebears, Hellenistic and medieval, called the lot of fortune the second ascendant. That's how important they saw it.
wow. Okay, so you've said a lot of amazing things today, and given a new significance, at least for me, of the first house, and lots of nuance and details to it. And one of the things that you brought up is that, in evolutionary astrology, it would be that the North Node is kind of like the soul's purpose or what we're growing into.
Sure.
In esoteric astrology, I know it is more related to the ascendant. When you practice astrology, how do you rectify that? Do you use the North Node as more of the soul's path, or do you use the ascendant or rising as more of what we're rising into, or both, or neither?
There are ways in which I look to them for different things. If we're going to just talk about the North Node and South Node related to the ascendant, I think the North Node, because I'm not an evolutionary astrologer, so there's nothing to take away from evolutionary astrology itself. But I think where we can have a middle ground is that the North Node becomes a pathway in which you're trying to restore and grow and develop aspects of yourself that have been where you may have been negligent. So the analogy I like to give is that I often think of the South Node as like your dominant arm or hand, and the North Node as the less dominant one. So it's more like you can use the North Node as what you need to kind of work on and grow in terms of characteristics for your development. And the ascendant is just more like, it's along with the ruler, more the plot line of your direction. And are you aligned with it? Are you doing it some unusual way? I can break it down a different way too. We started off talking about my skepticism. Now, I am a Pisces rising, as I've mentioned a few times, but my Jupiter is in Virgo in the opposite sign. So what that means, Jupiter is the planet that is the ruler classically of Pisces. So that means Jupiter's looking at the place where he rules and goes like, oh, or kind of looking at it like, well, I wish I were there. Maybe it's not that great anyway. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. So it can be this natural antagonism or skepticism to the place it rules, which can prompt growth. It's kind of like, well, I see that place. I want to get there, but how do I get there? I have to get there in some unusual way. Different than, being at home. It's like a New Yorker being out of New York, being in Hawaii, for example, right? As far, be like, what do you call this? It's not a bagel. This is not a bagel. It's like something else. And you kind of come to appreciate it in a different way. So our ruler, along with the ascendant, gives us some perspective on how we step more into the story. So there is a parallel to the North Node as how we kind of restore and develop some particular aspects of ourselves that have not been adequately attended to, whereas it's much more broader when we get into the ascendant. So that's how I would see it. An evolutionary astrologer might see it differently, but I think that's where we can agree on some things.
Wow. And this is what I love about having multiple perspectives, because there's so many different ways to look at this. And it doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong.
Correct.
It's a lot of what I found is it's kind of synthesizing lots of different types and finding what resonates for you. And so just to break down a little bit more what you just said, if someone's looking at the first house, they're like, I want to start to make sense of this now. I want to start to understand what this means about me. They're going to look at the sign that is on the cusp, which is also their rising sign. They're going to look at our little sheet and see which planet rules that sign. Once they know what planet rules that sign, they're also going to find where that planet shows up in their chart and what house it shows up in their chart. And then they're going to look at how those may be dialoguing with each other. So
Right.
like you said, it's opposing.
Correct.
So you're able to see that Jupiter is sort of looking over at the Pisces in the first house and going, maybe there's something there for me. Maybe there's something I need to integrate. Maybe I'd like to be over there. And maybe if I look at some of these things with more of a Piscean lens, I'll be able to have a different experience in my story.
Or to embrace the Pisces path from a Virgo perspective, right? Because it is Virgo. So for instance, I've done a lot of, I think you've heard me talk about Jupiter. I think one of my earliest talks was talking about Jupiter returns and Jupiter for Astrology Hub. So Jupiter in Virgo, I call the path of the craftsperson, right? Or the craftsman. And that's because it has to look at the minutia and the detail and is concerned about more getting into the innards of a thing. So things related to Pisces, more the spiritual path, the broad perspective, Jupiter in Virgo is commissioned, we could say, with a Pisces rising, is commissioned to kind of look at the forest and the trees. Although the hazardous, sometimes you can get lost in the forest by looking at the trees too closely, right? And the minutia. So I think that's helped me, as you mentioned, look at various forms of astrology and get more into the innards of them. Like, well, how does this all work? Or does it work? I want to kind of look underneath the hood and really, lack of a better word, master as much as I can master. So this is what someone may discover. For instance, you mentioned you are an Aquarius rising. Saturn rules both traditionally Capricorn and Aquarius. So we would look for your Saturn, and then your Saturn will give us some clues on how you both fulfill the mission of the sun in the way you may do it through the ascendant or the rising sign.
So my Saturn's in Leo in the 7th house.
Oh, so you have a similar path. It's kind of like, well, how do I assert being in Leo, a sign of the sun, which is a challenging position for Saturn? How do I fulfill the conditions of the sun in a way that builds community and a sense of connection with leadership? And this is what you've done, right? In terms of being at the center for Astrology Hub in order to get the other cycles and outlying circles working and coordinating in a way so it's not just about your power, right? But conditioning a sense of community. Because that Saturn can see the other shore and like, well, I want to assume some level of authority, but I don't want to be a tyrant. So how do I do it?
Yes, exactly. Fantastic. Okay. So I'm going to give you the link for the free gift here soon. And the gift, again, is going to help you do what we just did with Sam's chart and with my chart, where you're looking at, again, the rising sign, the ruler of that, and then finding where that planet is in your chart. What I want to say here is we are embarking on a journey. Yeah. We are going to take a journey through all 12 houses over the next 12 weeks. If at any point you feel overwhelmed or you're like, God, I don't get it. And what does this mean? And you start to feel stressed. I invite you to relax and enjoy the journey and trust that as we go week over week and we continue to come back to some of these ideas and we're looking at different houses, but we're using the same method to understand those houses, which is what's going to happen. You're going to hear this over and over. And so I just want to invite you to adopt a little bit of a beginner's mind. And this is what I tell everyone in our inner circle when they first join our membership, because learning astrology is like being on a journey of discovery. Think of yourself as an explorer into new worlds, into new lands, and those new worlds and new lands are yourself and the nuances and the complexities. And once you understand those things about yourself, you start to understand those things about other people, and it just goes from there. So I just would like to say here, take a deep breath, relax, enjoy. We're going to make it as easy and as fun and as pleasurable as possible. And after each episode, you're going to go, wow, I got a little bit more that time. And hey, whoa, I understand a little bit more. And my prediction, my guess is that by the end of the 12 weeks, you're going to feel like you have a command on your chart in a way that you've never had before. So I'm really excited for all of you to be here. Sam, I am thrilled that you just kicked this off for us. You are the one that just like set our course. You set us off in the right direction. And it's awesome that the first house is that also. That's actually what the first house is. You said that it is the story we're trying to tell, but then you also said something about steering.
Yeah. And that's
How you're steering your life.
right.
Yes, I love that. So you can get the free gift that's going to help you as we continue to go along these weeks at astrologyhub.com/ruler, astrologyhub.com/ruler. And you're going to hear the astrologers talk about this over and over. You need to look at the ruler of the house, and then you need to find that planet in the other places in your chart. So again, relax, enjoy. We're going to have an amazing time over the next 12 weeks. You're going to meet 12 amazing guides, astrologers, who are also our inner circle guides for 2023. So these are the best of the best. These are masters of this craft. Many of them they're living legends in the field of astrology, and they're great teachers. They're great teachers. And that's one of the things that we look for, is not only people that understand astrology and are really good at astrology, but that are also really good at teaching it and helping us understand it so that we can use it in our lives. So, Sam, thank you for kicking off this series.
Thank you for having me. It was fun. Well, it's always a joy to talk with you. So, it's good to connect.
Yes, it is. The pleasure is ours. Thank you for being here. Thanks to all of you for joining this kickoff event of this house series. I can't wait to see you for the second house, which is taught by Georgia Stathis. In the meantime, go ahead and get your free gift. Start to look at your chart. If it all looks completely like a foreign language, it's okay. We're going to start to decode it over the next few weeks. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of our community, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Do not make any of your plans for 2023 until you've received the scoop on the astrological tides coming our way from some of the world's top astrologers. We're going to make that easy for you to do. On December 10th, we're hosting a free live panel event where we'll go through all the major astrology of next year. You're going to learn about the major transits, when they're happening, why they matter, how they may affect the world, and most importantly, how you can work with these transits most effectively in your relationships, with your money, your career, all of the major aspects of life. Don't get caught without your map for 2023. Get the gift of foresight at our live forecast event. Go to astrologyhub.com/2023 and join us now. And P.S., even if you can't make it live, make sure you sign up, because everybody who signs up will get the recording within 24 hours of the live event. That's astrologyhub.com/2023. Can't wait to see you there.